Not too long ago I made a video talking about the best unit of every class in Fire Emblem, and today we are going to do the exact opposite. What is the worst unit of every class? And when I say every class, I mean every general class group, so to speak. So all mages make one category, all archers and bow users are one category, etc. This does mean several uncomparable units go unnoticed, it is what it is. And I am also only considering units for their canon class. Sure, you can make the dude a dancer, but that doesn't mean he is one. Anyway, let's get the ball rolling with one of the first classes that tends to join your army, the cavalier. Across the entire series, this is probably the best class there has ever been, it's top 2 at the very least, and due to the core elements of what makes a cavalier, it's basically impossible to be a useless one. The incredible movement range, the good defenses, uses of lances when axes tend to be rare in later chapters, the ability to easily rescue units in relevant games, it's an impressive resume that basically every horse-mounted unit can rely on. But still, one has to be the worst, and I think that when you put them all side by side, it quickly becomes obvious who it is. All the cards in the deck that is known as Radiant Dawn are stacked against Fiona. Look, Fiona was never gonna be Seth or Titania, her stats are way too weak for that. She's basically a growth unit, which is always a bit of an underwhelming situation, especially when compared to her fellow cavaliers from across the series. But Radiant Dawn was not exactly helping her to become the best version of herself. First of all, why the hell does a game where your available army constantly switches even have a unit that can be considered a growth unit? That's a mismatch right out of the gate, meaning that Fiona never really grows, she just becomes a massive combat liability in the chapter she is available in. But what about the other benefits of a cavalier, I hear you say? So movement, the ability to rescue, that kind of stuff. Well, this is where the hatred Radiant Dawn has for Fiona, and Fiona specifically, comes to light. Almost every single chapter where Fiona is available to use has some terrain shenanigans going on. Her first chapter and then another 2 are indoors, which in this game feature ledges that cavaliers can't use, only foot soldiers. Then much later in the game, when she makes her return in part 3, she is usable in a swamp, and then in part 4, you guessed it, we're also talking deserts, because it wasn't bad enough for her yet. Literally every single thing a cavalier should be and what it is known for, Fiona doesn't have. Part of that is due to her unit design, her bad stats, and part of that is due to the circumstances of the game, but at the end of the day, she is by far the most useless cavalier the series has ever seen. Let's stick with an early game group for our next class, archers, or basically anything that predominantly uses a bow. Even though there are clear advantages to archers, like the big range and the effectiveness against flying units, it took quite a while before they truly became good across the board. That is a pretty big theme in general, by the way, don't expect too many post-awakening characters in this video. Almost all of those characters, even the weaker ones in their games, are still better than some of the dross we had to use in earlier titles. In that light though, I want to give a special shout out to Virion from Awakening. He is pretty much the only unit post the 3DS era who I think can be considered the worst unit of his class, which says quite a lot, and I was tempted to reward him for that, but if we're being factual, he's not the worst early game archer there has ever been. Will is not good, Nami is not good, Shadow Dragon Norn is terrible, and Path of Radiance Rolf is even worse, and was close to winning even, but I think the absolute worst archer in Fire Emblem history is not one of the early game ones. Because even though his stats are so bad, he might as well have been one, Tomas in Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light doesn't join until chapter 12. After which you have already had access to 2 more archers, one of which is George, and he joins your army pre-promoted. Just for comparison though, just to make sure you understand how bad Tomas is, he joins your army 8 levels and 11 chapters later than Gordon, who joins in chapter 1 at level 1, and yet Tomas' strength is only 2 points higher. You have 7 levels of an opportunity for Gordon to get 2 strength level ups and he already hits harder. That's how bad Tomas is. George, who again joins your army 3 chapters earlier than Tomas, is better or equal in literally every stat. There is no reason, no point to using Tomas whatsoever, and that is all due to how bad this guy is designed. Shout out to the DS remake of this game too, where he is equally terrible to make him drop even further in the game's ranking. At least he's good in the 2 mysteries, I guess. Small step from the archers to the flying units, which are admittedly classes with much less competition. Pegasus Knights may not be elite in literally every single game, but flying in general is such a massive advantage that each of these units inherently has that it's basically impossible to be a terrible flying unit. The comparison to their fellow mounted units, the cavaliers, certainly applies in that regard. And for them, it led me to picking a name that appeared to be designed to be a growth unit, even though Fiona never actually hits the highs her fellow cavaliers hit, and that same pattern is basically repeated here. Once upon a time, a growth unit was known as an Est, named after the youngest of the 3 Pegasus sisters, and proud as she may be to carry Trope's name, not every game exactly designed her in a way that lives up to it. In the 2 Shadow Dragon games, Est joins incredibly late, so late that I never really bother with her anymore, but you can't deny she has good growth rates, and if you dedicate your time to her, she turns out alrightish across the board. Far from great, but not the worst Est ever. Because New Mysteries version of Est is an abomination. They just forgot that Est is supposed to have stellar growth rates. She is still among the top of the pack, growth rate wise, but her lead is not even remotely big enough to make trading her up ever worth it. And what remains then? A unit who joins late, is way underleveled, requires a great deal of investment only to turn out worse than her sisters, assuming you haven't just benched them. Yeah, that's not gonna work. And in a competitive class like Pegasus Knight, it especially won't fly. Speaking of competitive classes though, Wyvern Knights. I feel like it's pretty widely known that if Cavaliers aren't the best class in the series, Wyvern Knights are, and so competition here is super fierce. I'd say even fiercer than Cavaliers. Because while one always has to be the worst, I don't think there is a unit as bad as Fiona taking to the skies on a dragon. All Wyvern Knights are better than that from the first to the last. And so we have to look more at the other way a unit can be bad, which is being pointless. And in that regard, we cannot look past Ada of Freya 776. She joins in chapter 14 as an unpromoted dragon rider with decent-ish stats. She's no Tomas, she's definitely no Camilla either. Where the real problem lies though is the context here. Not only has Karen been with the team since chapter 4, and assuming you've used her a bit, she's probably better or comparable, Ada also joins at the same time as her brother Dean. And he is pre-promoted, he is better in every single aspect, he completely blows her out of the water. But hey, maybe Ada can impress in the chapter and persuade those who don't follow the numbers to pick her. I don't think so. Her joining chapter has several bow enemies, complete with far ranges, a ballista, and a boss wielding a tornado tome, which is effective against flyers. Ada is lucky if she survives the chapter, let alone become part of your army. And again, I'm being a bit extra negative here for added effect. Ada isn't the worst unit ever, but within the confines of her really strong class, she is definitely an outlier in the negative sense of the word. Let's stay in Jugdraw for the next entry, which are brigands, warriors, fighters, everything with a big old axe. And yeah, both our candidates here hail from Jugdraw, although they are from different games. In the left corner we have Ucharba from Genealogy of the Holy War. As a footlock unit in a game with massive maps, he was always gonna struggle, but in Ucharba's case it is particularly hurtful. After all, in this game you pick either him or his brother Uchar, who also uses axes, but does so from the back of a horse, meaning he is much more suited to the game he's in. Picking Ucharba is making the wrong decision, it's that simple. Stat-wise though, he is not great, but he is certainly better than our other nominee, Marty from Freya 776. He is Leaf's early game Axeman, joining in chapter 1, before then leaving in chapter 3 and returning in chapter 8. The initial look at his stats, or rather his growth rates, which are more important for an early game unit, is actually pretty impressive, as Marty boasts the best defense and HP growth rates in the entire game. And yet he finds himself in this discussion, and that has everything to do with 2 other very important stats, strength and skill. Marty has neither. He doesn't start with it and he doesn't grow it, so this big burly axeman will never hit hard if he manages to hit at all. I guess that if you just use him as a wall, he has a purpose, but that is not what you want from an axe user like him, and so I think we have to go for Marty, even if in a way, he has more benefits to him than Ucharba does. Ucharba is basically a handicap, Marty at least has benefits. But as a unit, in a vacuum, Ucharba is way better. His problems as a footlock unit in a Genealogy of the Holy War type game also apply to a candidate for another class, the armored unit, your generals and knights. Using Arden in Genealogy of the Holy War is torture. 5 movement in this game is just unworkable, especially when you consider that Genealogy kinda forces you to hurry up in plenty of chapters. As a unit though, he is not the worst, he's far from great, but he's no Gwendolyn from the Binding Blade. And yeah, I'm not gonna beat around the bush. Gwendolyn, or Wendy for friends, is one of the worst units in series history. She has to feature here. She joins at a point where it's no longer cute to be a little underwhelming, she does nothing in combat, her stats are way too weak for that, and worst of all, she fails at the #1 thing any armored knight should be able to do, and that is tank. Her HP is way too low to handle that, and while her defense isn't the worst thing ever, it's not even remotely good enough to balance out her many flaws. Yeah, it's not hard to see why Gwendolyn is in consideration for worst units in the series. Very few fail at their role as badly as she does. And that obviously also makes her the worst in her class, that goes without saying. And let's keep it to the same game for the worst mage we ever had, another candidate for the worst unit in series history. I could name a bunch of frail mages here from the Sprite days, like Nino, but Sophia is renowned for how terrible she is. All her stats are so incredibly bad, they're lower than some of the units who join in chapter 1, while Sophia doesn't join until chapter 14. And that chapter is easily one of the worst in the Binding Blade to begin with. A fog of war map in a desert, meaning that enemies can come from nowhere to attack her, while your bulky units struggle to protect her. And just look at her stats. Sophia won't survive even a single round of combat. Usually when units this bad and this level 1 show up in the mid to late game, they're of the Est variety, but Sophia really isn't. Sure, if you dedicate yourself to making her better and better, she won't turn out the worst thing ever, but she's not really a growth unit, her growths aren't anything special either. So yeah, short entry this, but just like with Wendy, there is no point to Nabanese when you're up against one of the worst units in series history. From one magic user to another, we have the clerics, easily one of the hardest classes to talk about in this video. After all, these are supporting units, and while some can become really good by rising above that, none fail to deliver on what a cleric should really be. There is no unit who is a cleric but fails to heal or underperforms in battle, they all kinda suck, so it's a very even playing field. And in such a situation, we have to look at one thing that really kills the usability of a cleric: joining late. A cleric can join late, it's that simple. Not only will we then never use them because we already have a bond with the existing one, all the added healing does add up to EXP, which the brand new cleric has missed out on. And from that angle, there can only really be two candidates: Maria, who joins in the literal last chapter of Mystery of the Emblem, and Kuiper, who joins with 2 chapters still to go in genealogy. Things to consider here. 2 chapters in genealogy time is more than it sounds. But Kuiper joins as a level 1 priest, so unpromoted, while Maria is a level 1 bishop, promoted. Kuiper has a couple of skills that boost his kit though, like Miracle, while Maria has none of that. It's very close, they both have their boons and banes, but I would say the worst of the two is Kuiper. Yeah, he can stick around longer and luck out of a killing blow, but his movement is very low, so he struggles to keep up with your main army, and a cleric lagging behind is like an ill calf in a group of buffaloes. They don't survive long. Sure, Maria doesn't survive long either, but that's because the game is literally almost done, and who knows, she might be able to put in a clutch heal, and that's really all you can ask of her. Now is probably a good time to also tackle that other support class, dancers. These are pretty much in the same boat as clerics. Yes, some dancers are better because they have certain extra abilities, but in essence all dancers do the same, and all of them succeed at that. However, unlike clerics, dancers rarely join early. They're almost always mid-game units, so we can't really use availability to make the decision here. Instead, we have to look at the context of the game, and keeping that in mind, I think an obvious winner arises, and that is Tethys. There is nothing wrong with Tethys at all, she does what a dancer needs to do and she does it well. However, Sacred Stones is pretty comfortably the easiest Fire Emblem game next to Birthright, and Azura is probably the best dancer, so she is out of consideration. You simply don't need a dancer as badly in Sacred Stones as you do in the other games. And so, while Tethys does nothing wrong, she does end up being the least useful, the least necessary, and least impressive dancer as a result of the game she's in. Sucks for her, but at least she can keep her head up and know she's probably the best unit in this video, at least. Next up, Swordmasters, Myrmidons, Mercenaries, etc. Here we have an interesting matchup between 2 candidates that both have their own argument for why they are the worst, or ever so slightly not. Carla from the Blazing Blade is not a serious unit. She's a playable Easter egg, obtained during the preparations for the final chapters if you've used your barter enough and wait around. Not only is that hyper-specific, she is also not remotely good enough to warrant it. In the vacuum though, there is nothing really wrong with Carla. If she and Carol switch places, he would be in trouble. It's just that in the final version, Carla is way more effort than she's worth. On the other hand, we have Marisa from fellow GBA title Sacred Stones. She joins in the mid-game, so a bit earlier, but does not have the stats to back it up. While her growths are certainly better, Sacred Stones is already not a sword-friendly game, with many enemies that hit from range, leaving Marisa as a wildly unimpressive option, and probably the worst unit in this class from a pure kit perspective. But that's the thing. There is more to a unit than just kit, and Carla fails at basically everything else, while also having an unimpressive kit for this point in the game. So I will go for Carla here, but if you think Marisa is worse considering the circumstances, you won't hear me disagree. We definitely stay on the GBA for the next class in attendance, Thieves, because let's be real, they suck in basically every GBA game. Thieves have always struggled with this balance between combat and thievery, but in the GBA games it definitely went the wrong way. Thieves are nearly useless for everything but opening chests here, only worsened by the fact they can't promote. And when you look at the batch of Game Boy Advance Thieves, one jumps out as being particularly useless, and that is Cav. Her way of recruitment is so incredibly obnoxious and unnecessary for a unit that does the exact same thing as all other thieves, which is nothing, that she has to win out as the worst of the bunch. In order to add Cav to your army, you need to speak to her 3 times across the different chapters she appears in, meaning that the earliest you can get her is chapter 20, with 22 also an option if you messed up earlier. Her stats though are nothing compared to what a unit should have at this point in the game, even one that isn't combat focused. Like, a support unit doesn't have to walk the map, but a bit of survivability would be nice, no? Cav doesn't have that, and for opening chests I would recommend just using Chad or Rostolvo. They do the job just as fine and joined 10 plus chapters earlier. When it came to the best unit of every class, the next one on the list was probably the most contentious group of them all. Lords, unique units, and other main characters who have been given their own busted kit and class to rack opponents with. From Marv and Sigurd in the early days to Byleth and Alir in the latest games, so many broken and super powerful units have come from this group that it was hard to nail down. But today, that is not the case. If you have ever played the Binding Blade, you will know that Roy absolutely sucks. There is not a lord, not a main character in the series that comes even remotely close to how terrible Roy is for like the vast majority of the game, until he gets the titular sword at least. It has often been theorized, probably correctly so, that Roy sucks on purpose, to highlight how inexperienced and young he still is, leaving the rest of the army to basically baby him to safety. But whether Roy is terrible on purpose or not, doesn't really matter. He is terrible, period. He's the only lord or main character you wish you could bench, there is no other even close. And finally we have the last group, transforming units, so Manakets, beasts and the like. I have purposefully saved this one for last, because well, we have seen some classes earlier in the video where the winner was quite obvious due to being one of the worst units in series history. For this group, that actually causes a problem. Among the worst Fire Emblem units ever, there are 2 transformable units. Bantu in New Mystery of the Emblem and Liar in Radiant Dawn are both unredeemably bad. As in, there is no saving them. Invest your whole playthrough into Wendy and Sophia and you might end up with something decent, but Bantu and Liar are genuinely beyond saving. Liar's stats are so incredibly poor that she is outclassed by literally everyone, even when transformed. Her speed is supposed to be her specialty, but is much lower than characters who joined earlier than her, and as a Legoose, Liar cannot be improved beyond just leveling her up. You can't give her better weapons, she can't promote, and as a cat she even loses her transformation faster than other Legoose, reverting her back to her even worse human form. Terrible, terrible, terrible. And then we have Bantu, who has probably the worst stats a Fire Emblem character has ever had. We're talking 2 strength, 3 skill, and 4 speed, all of which on a unit who can't even promote. His saving grace is his Firestone, which does do decent damage, but Bantu is so incredibly frail with 18 base HP that it doesn't matter. So they're probably among, say, the top 5 worst units in the entire series at least. I think that is a fair assessment, but who is really worse? Well, that depends on what you value. Liar won't impress you ever, not once. She is mediocrity of the absolute worst kind, the type who can't even get a lucky break once in a while. Bantu across the board is certainly worse, but his Firestone does allow him to add something to your campaign, even if it isn't consistent and you need to be careful of when to apply it. So it's closer than you may think, purely looking at the stats, but the numbers don't lie. Bantu is probably the worst unit in Fire Emblem history, but I would say with a pretty confident certainty that he is worse than Liar at least, horrendous as she is. These have been my picks. What do you think the worst units per class are? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like, subscribing. And if you're also interested in either the Pokemon or Mario series, you may want to check out my other channels, Pichupedia and Piantapedia. Links are in the description. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.